In a quiet town, there lived a man named Samuel and his wife Grace. They had been married for 15 years. Their home was peaceful and their love for each other was strong. But there was one thing missing in their life. They had no child. For many years, they prayed and hoped. Every morning, Grace will wake up early, kneel beside the bed, and whisper a prayer. God, please bless us with a child. Samuel will sit beside her and hold her hands. Don't worry, Grace, he will say softly, one day God will answer us. But the years keep passing. They visited hospitals, doctors ran tests, they tried different medicines. Some people even advised them to visit the traditional healers. They tried everything, still nothing happened. Sometimes Grace would cry quietly at night. Samuel hated seeing her in pains. You are enough for me, he will tell her. Child or no child, I will always love you. Grace will wipe her tears and smile, but deep inside her heart, she still wished to hear a child call her mother. One afternoon, Samuel was sitting with his close friend David under a mango tree near the market. They had been friends since childhood. David looked at him seriously. Samuel, can I tell you something honestly? Samuel nodded. Of course. David hesitated before speaking. You and Grace have been married for many years now. Maybe you should marry another wife. Samuel's face changed immediately. Another wife? He repeated slowly. Yes, David said. Not because Grace is bad, but maybe another woman could give you a child. Samuel shook his head. I love my wife, he said firmly. I know, David replied, but think about your future. Samuel remained silent. That night, the word stayed in his mind. Later that evening, Samuel sat beside Grace in their living room. She noticed his quiet face. Samuel, what is wrong? She asked. Samuel sighed. David told me something today. What did he say? Samuel looked at her carefully. He said, maybe I should marry another wife so that I can have a child. Grace remained silent for a moment. The room felt heavy. Then she slowly lowered her head. If that will make you happy, she said softly, I will accept it. Samuel was shocked. Grace, no. But Samuel, she said gently, you deserve to have a child. Samuel held her hands. You are my wife, my only wife. Grace forced a small smile, but deep inside her heart felt pain. Neither of them spoke about it again. A few months later, David came to Samuel's house with exciting news. Samuel, he shouted happily. Samuel came outside. What happened? My wife has given birth, David said proudly. A baby boy. Samuel smiled widely. That is wonderful. You must come to the naming ceremony next week, David said. I will be there, Samuel promised. Grace was also happy when she heard the news. The child is like our own nephew, she said. The day of the naming ceremony arrived. Samuel and Grace dressed neatly. Grace wore a beautiful blue wrapper and Samuel wore a clean traditional outfit. Are you ready? Samuel asked. Yes, Grace said. They walked together to David's house. The compound was full of people. Music was playing. Women were dancing. The smell of delicious food filled the air. Everyone was celebrating the newborn baby. David saw Samuel and ran to greet him. My brother, he said, hugging him. Congratulations, Samuel said. Come and see your nephew. David carried the baby carefully and handed him to Samuel. Samuel looked down at the small face. The baby was sleeping peacefully. He is beautiful, Samuel said. Grace also held the baby. Her eyes became soft as she looked at him. "What is his name?" she asked. David smiled proudly. "His name is Daniel." Grace gently touched the baby's tiny hands. "Daniel," she whispered. She did not know why, but she felt a strange connection to the child. Life continued normally for a few weeks. Then something terrible happened. One evening, the whole town heard shocking news. David and his wife had been involved in a terrible car accident while traveling to another city. The accident was very serious. People rushed to the hospital, but sadly, David and his wife did not survive. They both died that night. The entire town was heartbroken, but the biggest question remained: what would happen to their baby boy? Little Daniel had survived the accident. He was the only one left. Samuel sat quietly in his house that night. Grace looked at him. "That child?" she said slowly. Samuel nodded. "Yes." Neither of them needed to say more. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Grace, what if we adopt him?" Grace looked at him with wide eyes. "You mean raise him as our own son?" "Yes." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, Samuel, let's bring him home." The next day, they went to speak with David's relatives. After many discussions, everyone agreed that Samuel and Grace were the best people to raise the child. So they brought little Daniel home. Grace held him gently in her arms as they entered the house. For the first time in 15 years, their home finally had the sound of a baby, and their lives changed forever. The day Samuel and Grace brought baby Daniel into their home, everything felt different. The house that once felt quiet now had life in it. Every morning, Daniel's soft cries would wake them up. At night, Grace would rock him gently until he slept. Sometimes Samuel would sit beside them and smile. "Grace," he would say, "listen to that sound." Grace would laugh softly. "What sound?" "Our son breathing in his house." Grace would look at Daniel with love in her eyes. For 15 long years, their house had been silent. Now it was full of life. As the years passed, Daniel grew into a cheerful and curious boy. By the time he was 3 years old, he was already asking many questions. "Daddy, why is the sky blue? Daddy, where does rain come from?" Samuel would laugh. This boy asked too many questions. Grace would smile proudly. "He is very smart." Daniel loved learning new things. Whenever Samuel brought home a newspaper, Daniel would sit beside him and stare at the letters. "Teach me," he would say. Samuel began teaching him simple words. Very soon, Daniel learned how to read simple sentences. By the age of 5, he was already reading simple books. Teachers at his school were surprised. One day, his teacher called Grace to school. "Madam Grace," the teacher said, smiling, "your son is very intelligent." Grace's face lighted up. "Really?" "Yes, he learned faster than most children in his class." When Grace got home that day, she told Samuel the news. Samuel laughed proudly. "I told you that boy will do great things one day." Life was not perfect, but it was good. Samuel worked in a company as an office assistant. The pay was not huge, but it was enough to take care of the family. Grace also worked in a small office where she helped manage records. Together, they were able to pay Daniel's school fees and provide food for the house. They even lived in a small but comfortable apartment. Sometimes on weekend, Samuel would take Daniel to the park. Daniel loved those moments. Daddy, when I grow up, I want to build a big house for you and mommy, Daniel once said. Samuel laughed. First, finish your homework. When Daniel turned 10 years old, something unexpected began to happen. The first problem came from Grace's workplace. One afternoon, she returned home looking tired and worried. Samuel noticed immediately. Grace, what happened? Grace slowly sat down. They said the company is reducing workers, she said quietly. Samuel's face became serious and Grace looked down. I lost my job. The room became silent. Daniel, who was sitting on the floor reading a book, looked up. Mommy, are you okay? Grace forced a smile. Yes, my son, I'm fine. But inside her heart, she was worried. Without her salary, things would become difficult. Grace did not give up. After losing her job, she decided to start selling raw food stuff in the market. She will wake up very early every morning, go to the market, buy beans, rice and garri and sell them in a small portion. The profit was small, but it helped the family. Samuel supported her. You are a strong woman, he told her. Grace smiled. We must survive. For a while, things were still manageable, but another problem was coming. One day, Samuel came home later than usual. His face looked pale. Grace immediately noticed. Samuel, what happened? Samuel sat down slowly. There was a problem at work today. What kind of problem? Samuel sighed deeply. Money went missing in the office. Grace frowned. And they are blaming me. Grace stood up immediately. That is impossible. I know, Samuel said. I did not touch any money, but someone at the office had lied and said Samuel was responsible. No matter how much he tried to explain, the management did not listen. 2 weeks later, Samuel received the worst news. He had been dismissed from his job. Now, both Samuel and Grace had no stable income. Grace's small trading in the market was not enough. Bills started to pile up. The landlord began asking for rent. School fees were due. Food became scarce. Daniel began to notice the tension in the house. One evening, he heard his parents talking quietly. We cannot keep living here, Grace said sadly. Samuel nodded. The rent is too expensive. Grace wiped her eyes. We must have to move. A few weeks later, the family moved out of their apartment. They relocated to a small one-room apartment in a crowded area of town. The room was tiny. One corner had a small cooking stove. Another corner had their bed. All three of them now lived in that single room. The first night they slept there, Daniel looked around. The place was nothing like their old home, but he did not complain. Instead, he said something that surprised his parents. Daddy, don't worry, Daniel said. Everything will be okay. Samuel looked at him with watery eyes. You are a good boy. Soon, another painful decision had to be made. Grace sat down with Daniel one evening. Daniel, she said softly. Yes, mommy. Grace hesitated before speaking. We are having financial problem right now. Daniel listened quietly. We may not be able to pay your school fees for some time. Daniel remained silent. He understood what she meant. Do I have to stop school? He asked gently. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Just for now, Daniel nodded slowly. It's okay, mommy. Samuel watched the conversation from the corner of the room. His heart felt heavy. Daniel had always loved school, but now he had to drop out. Daniel soon started helping around the neighborhood to earn small money. There was a shop owner nearby who allowed him to work for him. His job was simple. He carried goods, cleaned the shop, and helped arrange items. At the end of the day, the man would give him a small amount of money. It was not much, but Daniel always brought the money home and gave it to Grace. Use it for food, he would say. Grace would hug him tightly. You are a blessing to us. But things were about to become even harder because a terrible sickness was slowly approaching Samuel, and their greatest struggle had not even begun. Life in the small one-room apartment was not easy. Every day was a struggle for the small family. Grace woke up very early every morning before the sun came out. She would carry her basket and go to the market to buy small quantities of foodstuffs to sell. Daniel would also wake up early to help prepare things before she left. Sometimes he would sweep the small room and fetch water from a nearby well. Samuel tried his best to stay strong, but the loss of his job had affected him deeply. He spent most days walking around town searching for work, but every place he went gave the same answer. We are not hiring. Days turns into weeks. Weeks turns into months, still nothing changed. One evening, Samuel returned home looking weak. He sat down slowly on the small wooden chair in the room. Grace noticed immediately. Samuel, are you okay? Samuel forced a weak smile. I'm just tired. But the truth was worse than simple tiredness. Over the next few days, Samuel's health became worse. He began coughing often. Sometimes he complained of pain in his chest and body. Grace became worried. You need to go to the hospital, she said. Samuel shook his head. With what money? Grace had no answer. The little money she made from selling foodstuff was barely enough to buy food. Hospital bills were far beyond what they could afford. Daniel watched everything quietly. He hated seeing his father suffer. Daniel began working longer hours at the shop. The shop owner, a man called Mr. Bello, noticed how hardworking the boy was. One evening, Mr. Bello called him. Daniel, he said, you are a good boy. Thank you, sir. I know things are hard for your family. Daniel nodded quietly. My father is sick, he said softly. Mr. Bello sighed. Life can be very unfair sometimes. At the end of the day, Mr. Bello gave Daniel 1,000 naira. This is extra, he said. Daniel looked surprised. Thank you, sir. Take care of your parents. Daniel held the money tightly. That 1,000 felt like a treasure. He planned to use that money to buy medicine for his father, but something very strange was about to happen. Back at home, Samuel's sickness continued to grow worse. Some days he was too weak to even stand up. Grace tried different local herbs and medicines from the market, but nothing worked. One night, Samuel began coughing heavily. Grace held him, her eyes full of tears. We must find a way to take you to the hospital, she said. Samuel looked at her and shook his head slowly. Save the money for Daniel, he whispered. Grace began to cry. Daniel stood in the corner of the room, watching helplessly. The night he could not sleep. His mind was full of worries. Late that night, Daniel finally fell asleep, and then something unusual happened. In his dream, he found himself standing in a quiet open field. The air was calm. Everything around him felt peaceful. Then, suddenly, he saw a man standing in a short distance away. The man looked familiar, very familiar. As the man stepped closer, Daniel's eyes widened. It was David, his real father. The man who had died many years ago in the incident. Daniel's heart began to beat fast. "Father," he said slowly. David smiled warmly. "Yes, my son." Daniel felt confused. "But you are dead." David nodded gently. "Yes, but I have been watching you." Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes. "Life has been very hard," he said. "I know," David replied. "I've seen everything. I've seen how much you have taken care of Samuel and Grace." Daniel looked down. "They are good parents." "Yes," David said. "They raise you with love." David then looked at him seriously. "Your family needs help." Daniel nodded. "My father is very sick." David reached out and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Listening carefully, Daniel focused. "You have 1,000 with you right now," David said. Daniel looked surprised. "How did you know?" David smiled. "I know." Then he continued. "Tomorrow morning, take that 1,000 and go play a lottery." David frowned. "A lottery?" "Yes." David spoke softly. "Those are the numbers you must choose." He mentioned 5 numbers clearly. Daniel listened carefully and repeated them in his mind so he would not forget. Saying the numbers, David looked at him one last time. "Trust what I've told you. Everything will change." Then slowly, David began to fade away. "Wait!" Daniel shouted, but the dream ended. Daniel woke up suddenly. His heart was beating fast. The dream felt so real. He sat up and looked around the small room. Samuel was laying weakly on the bed. Grace was sleeping beside him. Daniel looked at the 1,000 he had placed under his pillow. His mind was full of questions. Was that dream real? He wondered. Part of him felt unsure, but another part of him felt something strange inside, which is hope. Finally, he stood up. "Maybe I should try," he whispered. Later that morning, Daniel walked through the busy street. He stopped in front of a small lottery shop. He had never entered such a place before. People were standing around writing numbers on small papers. Daniel felt nervous. What if this is a mistake, he thought. But then he remembered the dream. He walked up to the counter. The man there looked at him. "Yes, what do you want?" Daniel swallowed. "I want to play." "Which number?" Daniel slowly mentioned the 5 numbers his father had given him in the dream. The man wrote them down. "That will be 1,000. Daniel handed over the money. The man gave him a small ticket. Daniel looked at the ticket for a moment. Then he left the shop. He had no idea that the small paper he held in his hands was about to change his life forever. That evening, the lottery results were announced. People gathered around the shop to check their numbers. Daniel also walked there quietly. His heart was beating fast. The man at the shop pinned the result on the wall. Everyone rushed forward. Daniel slowly stepped closer. He looked at the first number. His eyes widened. "It matches." He looked at the second number. "It matches too." Then the third, then the fourth. His hands started shaking. Finally, he looked at the last number. Daniel froze. All 5 numbers matched, the exact numbers from his dream. Daniel just won 50 million naira. The small poor boy who once dropped out of school had just become incredibly rich. But the biggest surprise was still waiting, because Daniel was only 17 years old. And this miracle was just the beginning of his story. Daniel stood in front of the lottery shop wall, staring at the numbers again and again. His heart was beating so fast that he could hear it in his ears. He checked the numbers on his ticket. Then he looked back at the result. Again and again, they were the same. All five numbers matched perfectly. Daniel felt like the ground under his feet had disappeared. Is this real? He whispered to himself. People around him were also checking their ticket. Some looked disappointed and walked away, but Daniel was still standing there, frozen. Finally, he walked slowly to the man behind the counter. Sir, can you please check this ticket for me? Daniel said nervously. The man took the ticket and looked at it. At first, his face was normal, but after checking the numbers carefully, his eyes suddenly widened. Wait a minute. He checked the number again. Then he looked at Daniel. Where did you get this ticket? I bought it this morning, Daniel replied. The man looked shocked. Boy, do you know what this means? Daniel shook his head slowly. You have just won the jackpot. Daniel's mouth fell open. The jackpot? Yes, the man said. You have won 50 million. Daniel could not believe what he was hearing. For a moment, he thought he might faint. 50 million naira. The boy who had only 1,000 the previous day was now suddenly a millionaire. Daniel held the ticket tightly and began running home as fast as he could. His mind was full of excitement, but more than anything, he kept thinking about one thing. My father must go to the hospital. When he reached the small room apartment, he pushed the door open quickly. Mom. Grace turned from the small cooking stove. Daniel, why are you shouting? Daniel was breathing heavily. Mom, something unbelievable happened. Grace looked worried. What happened? Daniel held up the ticket. I won the lottery. Grace blinked in confusion. What lottery? The one I played this morning. Grace looked at him carefully. How much did you win? Daniel swallowed. 50 million. The spoon in Grace's hand fell to the floor. What? I won 50 million naira. Daniel repeated. Grace stared at him in silence. Then she began shaking her head slowly. Daniel, this is not time for jokes. I'm not joking, Daniel said. Just then, Samuel, who had been laying weakly on the bed, slowly raised his head. What are the two of you talking about? Grace turned to him. Daniel says he won 50 million naira. Samuel tried to sit up. 50 million? Daniel quickly walked to him. Yes, father. Samuel looked at him carefully. Are you serious? Daniel nodded. I checked the numbers many times. For a moment, the small room was completely silent. Then Grace suddenly burst into tears. Tears of relief. Tears of joy. God has answered our prayers, she cried. The very next morning, Daniel took his father to a good hospital in the city. The doctors immediately began treating Samuel. After many tests and proper treatment, Samuel slowly began to recover. The doctor later explained that if he had arrived a few weeks later, his condition might have become very dangerous. Grace held Daniel's hand tightly. You saved your father, she said with tears in her eyes. Daniel smiled softly. No, Mom, God saved him. After Samuel recovered, Daniel made another big decision. He told his parents one evening, we cannot continue living in that one-room apartment. Samuel looked at him. What are you planning? Daniel smiled. I want to buy us a house. Grace's eyes widened. A house? Yes. Within a few weeks, Daniel bought a beautiful house in a peaceful neighborhood. The house had several rooms, a large living room, and a small garden outside. The day they moved in, Grace walked slowly through the house, touching the walls. Is this really ours? She asked. Daniel nodded. Yes, Mom. Grace sat down and began crying again, but this time they were tears of happiness. Samuel placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You have changed our lives. Daniel also remembered how hard Grace had worked in the market. One evening, he said to her, Mom, I want to open a business for you. Grace looked surprised. What kind of business? A big foodstuff store. Daniel rented a good shop in the market and filled it with bags of rice, beans, gari, and many other items. Grace became the owner of the shop. Customers came every day. The business began growing quickly. Grace could hardly believe how life had changed. But Daniel did not want to waste the money. He remembered all the difficult days he had faced. So he decided to invest the money wisely. He started learning about business from successful people. He read books, he asked questions. Soon he started his own small company, buying and selling agricultural products from farmers and supplying them to the big market. Because he was hardworking and honest, his business began growing fast. Within a short time, Daniel became known as a young businessman with a bright future. One evening, Samuel sat outside the house watching the sunset. Daniel came and sat beside him. Samuel looked at his son proudly. Do you know something? He said. What is it, father? You become a millionaire before the age of 17. Daniel smiled. But none of these would mean anything if I didn't have you and Mom. Samuel nodded slowly. We may not be your real parent, he said softly. Daniel immediately shook his head. No. Samuel looked at him. You are my real parents, Daniel continued. You raised me, you loved me. That is what makes a family. Samuel's eyes became wet. He pulled Daniel into a hug. I'm proud of you, my son.